Chapter 2. Connecting with your reader. Recreating yourself and your audience. Your research counts for little if no one reads it. Yet even experienced researchers sometimes forget to keep their readers in mind as they plan and draft. In this chapter we show you how to think about readers as you begin your research. We also explain one of the best ways to anticipate how readers will respond working in collaboration with others. Most of the important things we do with others. Some students think that research is different. They imagine a solitary scholar reading alone in a hushed library or peering into a microscope surrounded only by glassware and computers. But no place is more filled with voices than a library or lab. Even when you work alone, you silently converse with others when you read a book or call up a website. Every time you go to a source for information, you renew a relationship between writers and readers that may be centuries old. And when you report your own research, you can hope that other voices will respond to yours, so that you can in turn respond to them. And so it goes. But conversation is a social activity. Both sides have to understand what each expects of the other, what social role each is expected to play. And that's especially true when the conversation is in writing and among professional colleagues. 2.1 Creating roles for writers and readers. When we talk with others in person, we judge them by how well they play the roles expected of them. Do they listen carefully, make claims thoughtfully, answer questions directly? It's the same when you read. Abrams is modest but not careful about this evidence. Quincy has good data but overgeneralizes. Right? Now, we three expect that you are judging us. But just as in conversation, these judgments go both ways. Readers judge a writer, but a thoughtful writer has in advance also judged her readers by imagining who they are, what they are like, what they know, what they need and want. And then she uses that judgment to shape what she writes. For example, the writer of these next two passages judged that she was addressing readers with different levels of knowledge about the chemistry of heart muscles. So she imagined herself in very different relationships with them. 1a. The control of cardiac irregularity by calcium blockers can best be explained through an understanding of the calcium activation of muscle groups. The regulatory proteins actin, myosin, tropomyosin, and troponin make up the sarcomere, the basic unit of muscle contraction. 1b. Cardiac irregularity occurs when the heart muscle contracts uncontrollably. When a muscle contracts, it uses calcium, so we can control cardiac irregularity with drugs called calcium block ERS. To understand how they work, it is first necessary to understand how calcium influences muscle contraction. The basic unit of muscle contraction is the sarcomere. It consists of 4 proteins that regulate contraction. They are actin, myosin, tropomyosin, and troponin. In 1a, the writer seems to cast herself and her readers in the roles of equally knowledgeable expert colleagues. In 1b, she casts her reader as someone who knows nothing about the subject and herself as the patient expert, slowly explaining a complicated issue. If she judged correctly, her readers will judge her favorably. But when a writer miscasts readers, she can lose their trust and often their willingness to read. Had she switched audiences for those passages, the non-expert would likely think 1a indifferent to his needs and her expert colleagues would judge 1b to be condescendingly simple-minded. In fact, writers cannot avoid creating a role for their readers. That's why, in writing this book, we tried to imagine you, what you are like, what you know about research, whether you even care about it. We cast you in a role, created a persona for you that we hoped you would comfortably adopt. Then we imagined ourselves in our own persona, talking to the you that we imagined you would be willing to be. That was not easy because there are so many yous out there, all different. We hoped to speak as comfortably to those of you starting your first serious research project as to those well into your careers. Only you can judge how well we've managed to talk to and with all of you. These personas and the relationship you create with your own readers are so important that they are worth thinking about well before you envision a first draft. If you miscast readers, your mistake will leave in your early drafts so many traces that you won't easily fix them in the final one. To point to creating a relationship with your reader, your role. Few people read research reports just for fun. So you have to know what you can offer readers to create a relationship that makes them want to read your report. Beginning researchers too often offer a relationship that caricatures a bad classroom exchange. Teacher, I know so much less than you, who will give me a grade? So my role is to show you how much information I dug up, and yours is to decide whether I've found enough. That's a big mistake. Not only does it demean both you and your teacher, but it makes your project just one long, pointless drill. Worst of all, it casts you in a role exactly opposite to that of a true researcher. In a research report, you have to reverse the roles of teacher and student. As a researcher, you have to adopt the role of someone who knows what others need to know and to cast your reader as someone who doesn't know but needs to. That will be easier. If you find a research question that you want to answer and your teacher can't without your help. In fact, your teacher is likely to know less than you about your specific question. But even if not, you have to step into the kind of relationship researchers have with their readers, one that goes beyond here are the facts I've dug up about medieval Tibetan weaving. Did I get them right? So your first step in establishing a sound research relationship with readers is to offer them more than a collection of known facts. There are three such offers that experienced researchers typically make. The third is most common in academic research. As you begin, imagine that you will offer, and your readers will accept one of the three following relationships, but most likely the third. 2.2.1 I found something really interesting. You take a step beyond mere data grubbing when you can say to your readers, let me share some information about medieval Tibetan weaving that I think is really interesting. If you have learned something that interests you, and you can demonstrate that interest in your report, that's the best start you can make in learning to do sound research. In an introductory writing course, the interest you seem to take in your work will roughly predict the interest your teacher will take in it. Ideally, of course, you want her to be as interested in Tibetan weaving as you are, and if you are in a class in Asian art, she may be. But even if not, you still have to cast yourself in the role of someone who has found something interesting, maybe even new and important, at least to yourself, and to cast your reader in the role of someone equally interested. As you become more experienced, you'll also be responsible for actually finding an audience who shares those interests. But at the start, you must at least find a role for yourself that shows your own interest, even enthusiasm for what you've found. 2.2.2 I found a solution to a practical problem important to you. You take a bigger step toward focused research when you can imagine saying to readers not just I have information that might interest you, but my information will help you solve a problem you care about. That is the kind of research that people in business, commerce, and government do every day. They confront problems whose solutions require research, first just to understand them and then to figure out how to solve them. Problems range from homelessness to falling profits to terrorism. To help you learn that role, teachers sometimes invent real-world scenarios. An environmental science professor might assign you to write a report for the director of the State Environmental Protection Agency on what to do about cleaning up toxins in a local lake. In this scenario, you are not a student dumping data on a teacher, but someone who must play the role of a scientist giving practical, pragmatic advice to someone who needs it. To make your report credible, you have to play the role of a dispassionate expert, able to use the right terminology, cite the right sources, find and present hard evidence, and so on. But most of all, you have to design your report around a specific intention that shapes your role to advise a reader about what he must do to solve his problem. That kind of research report is common in the world at large, but is much less common in the academic world than the following one. 2 February 2003 I found an answer to a question important to you. Although academic researchers sometimes offer advice to people like EPA directors, their most common role is that of the scholar, someone who answers questions so that a research community can simply understand its area of special interest better. Others might later use those answers to solve a practical problem. An arcane discovery about the distribution of prime numbers, for example, helped cryptologists design an unbreakable code. But the research itself aimed primarily at solving not a practical problem, but a conceptual one defined by incomplete knowledge or flawed understanding. Some researchers call this pure, as opposed to applied research. Teachers occasionally invent real-world scenarios based on conceptual problems. A political science professor asks you to play the role of a senator's intern researching the effect of TV on children's intellectual growth. But more typically, they expect you to imagine yourself as what you are learning to be, a researcher who can address an academic research community interested in a question that its members want to understand better. Your report on medieval Tibetan weaving, for example, might help explain some larger question not entirely understood, perhaps how medieval Tibetan art influenced modern Chinese art. 2.3 Creating the other half of the relationship, the reader's role. When you adopt one of those three roles, you create one half of the relationship between you and your readers. You create the other half when you write in a way that casts your readers in a complementary role, one giving them a specific reason to read your report. To do that, you have to imagine them as the kind of readers who expect you to do what you in fact intend to do. In creating those roles, you offer your readers a social contract: I'll do my part if you do yours. If you cast them in a role that they accept, but then you create one for yourself that doesn't match, you seem not to be upholding your end of the bargain. But if you offer them a role they are unwilling to adopt, you are likely to lose them entirely. For example, suppose you are a researcher who is an expert on blimps and zeppelins. You have been invited to share your research with 3 different groups that have 3 different reasons for wanting to know what you know. 2.3.1 Entertain me with something interesting. I didn't know. Imagine that the first group that has invited you to speak is the local Zeppelin Club. Its members are fascinated with Zeppelins, and though they know a lot about them, they are not experts, just ordinary folk who have made Zeppelins their hobby. You decide to share some new facts you've dug up and to tell an entertaining tale or two. You read a letter from great-uncle Otto to your father describing a trip on a Zeppelin in 1936, and you pass around some photographs and menus he saved. In planning that report, you judge that not much is at stake in it other than a diverting hour of Zeppelin lore. If so, you fulfill your side of the bargain when you tell them something about Zeppelins that is new and interesting to them, even unsubstantiated folklore, and you don't bring along overheads, data tables, or footnotes to substantiate your sources. Your audience fulfills its role by listening with interest, maybe by sharing their own anecdotes. You don't expect them to challenge the authenticity of the letter or the menu or ask skeptical questions about how the photos and menus should change their wider understanding of the social history of Zeppelins. Some beginning researchers imagine their readers are like the Zeppelin Club, eager to hear any information new to them. While that sometimes works for experts who find the right audience, see the box below, it rarely works for students learning to do and report research. Your teachers assign you research projects to see not just what you can find but what you can make of it. Though March 2002 helped me solve a practical problem. Now imagine that you have been invited to meet with the public relations department of Hote.com. They suffer from low name recognition and want to use a blimp to get their logo before the public, flying it at sporting events, outdoor concerts, and other large gatherings. But they don't know whether that's a practical solution. So they have hired you as a consultant to tell them how much it will cost, how many days the weather is good enough to fly, and so on. For this group, you won't mention what great-uncle Otto had for dinner on his Zeppelin flight in 1936. To succeed in this relationship, you must offer them a solution to their problem and only those facts that back it up. That is the kind of situation you are likely to face if you have a job or internship, or if your teacher creates one of those senior iOS for a real-world writing assignment. You are an environmental scientist advising the state EPA about the polluted lake. Academic researchers do sometimes write on practical problems, but conceptual ones are far more common, even in applied disciplines like engineering. So pose a practical problem only if your teacher has created a specific scenario for one or you have checked with her first. We'll discuss practical problems in more detail in the next chapter. 2.3.3 Help me understand something better. Now imagine that your audience is the faculty of Seppo University's Department of Lighter-than-Air Studies, with the same stand ing as, say, your departments of English or Physics. They study the history of blimps and Zeppelins, do research on their economics and aerodynamics, and participate in a worldwide conversation about their cultural history and social significance. They compete with one another in producing new knowledge and new lighter-than-air theories that they publish in lighter-than-air journals and books read by everyone in their field. These scholars have invited you to talk about your specialty, transatlantic Zeppelin flights in the late 1930s. They don't want you just to amuse them, though they will be happy if you do, or to help them do something, though they would be pleased to learn how to get consulting work with Hote.com. What they most want is for you to tell them something they don't know about zeppelins, not just for its own sake, but so that they can better understand something new about them. Because these lighter-than-air scholars are interested in the truth about zeppelins, you know they will expect you to be objective, rigorously logical, faithful to the evidence, able to see every question from all sides. You also know that if you don't nail down the facts, they will hammer you during the question period afterward and during cocktails after that, not just to be contentious or even nasty, though some will be, but to get as close as they can to the truth about zeppelins. If you offer something new, like Great Uncle Otto's menus, they will want to know where and how you got them, and how those items contribute to their understanding of the topic. And to be sure they are the real thing, they will question you closely about how you know they are authentic. More important, they will take an interest in those menus only. If you can show them how they help answer a question important to their understanding of zeppelins, especially if you can convince them that they do not understand something about zeppelins as well as they thought. If you don't, they will ask you the most vexing question of all, so what? Why should I care about your menus? So you begin your talk. As we all have been led to believe by a number of studies on the food service on transatlantic Zeppelin flights in the 1930s, especially Schmidt 1986 and Kloepfer 1998, shellfish and other highly perishable items were never served because of fears regarding health. However, I have recently discovered a menu from 12th July 1936 crossing of the Hindenburg indicating that oysters were served at dinner. That is the kind of conversation you join when you report research to a community of scholars, whether lighter than air or not. When you enter into this relationship with them, you must imagine them having this conversation with you in their minds, never mind whether your style is graceful. Though I will admire your work more if it is, don't bother me with amusing anecdotes about your great uncle Otto, though I like hearing them if they help me understand your ideas better. Ignore whether what you know will make me rich, though I would be happy if it did. Just tell me something that I don't know so that I can better understand the topic of our common interest. Since your particular readers will be strongly inclined to adopt this third role, they will think you have fulfilled your side of the bargain only when you meet their expectations and answer their questions, only when you treat them as who they think they are. To be sure, the faculty over in chemistry or philosophy probably won't care much about your views on zeppelins, much less their meal service. Who cares about the trivia they study over in the lighter-than-air department? But then you don't have much inter-EST in their issues either. You are concerned with your particular community of readers, with their particular interests and expectations. The trick is to get your research community to recognize and accept not only the role you adopted for yourself, but the role you have cast for them, which means you first have to learn what kinds of roles they are willing to play. Several of the follow-ing chapters show you how to do that. Who cares about that? Academic researchers are regularly chided for their esoteric interests. That charge is usually unfair, but some researchers do seem to have a blinkered fascination with narrow objects of study. W.I.L. Williams once attended the dissertation defense of a PhD candidate who had discovered reels and reels of silent film shot by European anthropologists in Africa and Asia in the early part of the 20th century. No one had known that those films existed. These new data fascinated most of the examiners, film scholars who never questioned their worth. But when Williams asked, "But how does this discovery improve or even correct our understanding of movies then or now?" the candidate had no answer. She merely described again the specific content of the films, concluding, "And no one has ever seen this footage before." Williams asked his question in different ways but never got a better answer. The film showed. Others, on the other hand, were untroubled because they, no doubt, were already thinking about how the footage might change their thinking about early film. Besides, they all loved the movies. So sometimes new data alone are enough to interest the right readers. But if that candidate hopes to write a research report that gets anyone but a small group of specialists to care about her work, she will have to make an offer better than "Here's some new stuff." 2.4 Writing in groups. One of the best ways to see how the reader-writer relationship works in person is to share your writing in an organized group. A group is better at anticipating what your intended readers will expect and at predicting their responses. A group can also be more critical of its collective work than any individual can. Moreover, a group can bring more resources to bear on a project than someone working alone. So if your teacher does not set up writing groups, ask her to consider doing so. Or form a group on your own. At the least, recruit some friends to respond to your drafts as surrogate readers. If you are trapped into working entirely alone, skip to 2.5 p.30. 2.4.13 Keys for working together successfully. Talk a lot. Create conditions that get you talking a lot. Set regular meeting times, share email addresses and fax numbers. Do what you can to ensure that you talk regularly. At your first meeting, work on telling your elevator story, how you would describe your project to a stranger in an elevator as it goes from the first to the 20th floor. It should describe your question or problem, the kind of claim you expect to offer, and the kind of evidence that supports it. Practice your elevator story at every meeting, even with outside friends, until you can explain your project in a way that everyone thinks is clear and interesting. You will find the next 2 chapters particularly useful for this. You should also talk about your intended readers. What do they know already? What is important to them? What do you want them to do with your report? Use our checklists to share ideas. About readers, pp. 32-33, to ask questions systematically, pp. 45, 49, and to reformulate them as a problem, pp. 49-52. The more your group talks together, the better you will write together. You will need to talk less if, like the 3 of us, you have already worked together and can anticipate how the others think. Yet in writing this book, we 3 still made scores of phone calls, exchanged hundreds of email messages, and sat together a dozen times, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles to do so. Agree to disagree. Don't expect to agree 100% on every issue. You will differ over particulars, sometimes heatedly. In resolving those differences, your group can do its best thinking if everyone is explicit about what each believes and why. On the other hand, nothing impedes progress more than someone's insisting on his wording or on including only her data. If the first rule of writing in a group is to talk a lot, the second is to keep disagreements in perspective. When you disagree over minor issues with little impact on the whole, forget it. Organize and plan. The group should appoint a moderator, facilitator, coordinator, organizer. The job has different names and can either rotate or be permanently assigned. That person keeps track of the schedule, checks progress, moderates discussions, and when the group seems deadlocked, decides which way to go. Someone else should maintain a common outline that is updated regularly, first as a topic outline P 187, then as an outline of your argument P 139, and finally an outline of your points P 188. If your project needs lots of data, someone should maintain a schedule to gather them and a list of sources consulted and still to be consulted, annotated by how useful each source has been or might be. Everyone can stay up to speed if your updated outlines, notes on sources, and comments are put up on a website available to all. 2.4.23 Strategies for working in groups. Groups can organize their work in three ways, each of which has benefits and risks. Most groups combine these strategies. Divide and delegate. This strategy works best when tasks are parceled out to make best use of the special talents of each member. A group working on a survey, for example, might decide that two people are good at gathering data, two others at analyzing them and producing graphics, two more at drafting, and all will take a turn at revising. Working on this revision, for example, one of us, of course, the youngest, was assigned responsibility for explaining how to use the internet. This strategy crucially depends on each member finishing tasks on time. If one fails, all fail. A risky strategy is to assign whole sections of a document to different members to research, draft, and revise. That works only when the parts of a report are independent, but even then one has to make the parts hang together, and that can be difficult. If members have failed to consult along the way, and if one fails to meet a deadline, all fail. Work side by side. Some groups share all the work all the way. This works best with a small, tightly knit group working on a clearly defined project with ample time, like 4 engineering students devoting a semester to one design project. The disadvantage is that some people are uncomfortable talking about half-formed ideas before they work them out in writing. Others find it even more difficult to share drafts. To follow this strategy, members must be tolerant with one another. Too often, the most confident person ignores the feelings of others, dominates the process, and blocks progress. Take turns. Once all the data have been gathered and an outline agreed on, some groups take turns drafting and revising so that a text slowly evolves toward a final version. This strategy works when differences among members complement rather than contradict one another. For example, in a group working on a history of stories about the Alamo, one person might be interested in the clash of cultures, another in political consequences, and a third in the role of narrative in popular culture. After what they find, they take turns working on the whole draft. One writer does a rough draft with enough structure so that both ERs can see the shape of the argument. Each member in turn takes over the draft, adding ideas that seem important. The group must agree that the person working on the draft owns it while she has it and can change it however she wishes, so long as the changes reflect a common understanding of the main point the whole project supports. This approach runs two risks. First, the final draft might zigzag from one interest to another. A group that works by turns must agree on a final goal and shape of the whole, and each member must respect the perspectives of the others. Second, you can lose track of who has revised what version of a draft. To avoid confusion, round-robin the drafts so that only one person is work ing on any one part of a draft at any one time and it is clear who gets the draft next. Some groups use different strategies at different stages. In early planning, they work side by side until they form a general sense of their problem. Then for data gathering, they divide up the work, then take turns for revision. That's what we did in RIT. ing this book. Early on, we worked side by side until we had an outline, then assigned ourselves separate chapters. When the process stalled, we worked side by side again to revise our plan. That happened 3 times. Most often, though, each of us drafted individual chapters, then circulated drafts round-robin style. As a result, all of the chapters differ from the ones originally drafted, most quite a bit. Whatever your strategy, the greatest risk is lack of coordination, so be clear who is supposed to do what and when. Then write it down and give everyone a copy. Working in groups is hard work, and it can be especially hard on the ego, but it can also reward those willing to listen to the sometimes harsh but usually helpful judgment of others. 2.5 Managing the unavoidable problem of inexperience. All researchers start as novices. We all face the uneasiness of trying to establish ourselves in a field whose basic rules we don't fully understand, much less all the subtle and unspoken rules that go into acting and writing like a member of our research community. Then, much to our surprise, we feel that novice anxiety again when we begin a new project on a topic that we don't know much about. We 3 authors have felt those anxieties, not just starting out, but long after our hair had grayed. No one can avoid feeling overwhelmed and anxious at times, but there are some things you can do about it. First, be aware that there are uncertainties and anxieties that you cannot avoid. You can learn something about them from a first quick reading of this book. Get over those you can, but don't hold it against yourself when you feel anxious. It is not a sign of incompetence, but of inexperience. Second, get control over your topic by writing about it along the way. Don't just retype or photocopy sources, write summaries, critiques, questions. The more you write as you go, no matter how sketchily, the more confidently you will face that intimidating first draft. Third, understand the whole process by breaking it into manageable steps, but be aware that those steps are mutually supportive. Once you find a topic and formulate a good question, you'll draft and revise more effectively. Conversely, if you anticipate how you will draft and revise, you can more effectively find a problem now. Fourth, count on your teacher to understand your struggles. Good teachers want you to succeed, and you can expect their help. If they don't help, look for other mentors whom you might consult. Finally, set realistic goals. You do something significant when you wind up your project feeling that you have changed what you think and that your readers think you did it soundly, even if they don't agree. Most important, recognize the struggle for what it is, a learning experience. To overcome the problems that all beginners face, do what successful researchers do, especially when discouraged, press on, confident that it will turn out okay. Perhaps only okay considering. But perhaps even better than okay. A checklist for understanding your readers. Think about your readers from the start, knowing that you'll understand them better as you work through your project. Answer these questions early on, then revisit them when you start planning and again when revising. 1. Who will read my report? Professionals. General readers who are well informed. General readers who know little about the topic. 2. Do they expect me to do what I intend to do? Should I entertain them? Provide new factual knowledge? Help them understand something better? Help them do something to solve a practical problem in the world? 3. How much can I expect them to know? What do they know about my topic? What special interest do they have in it? What are they likely to expect me to discuss? Is the problem one that they already recognize? Is it one that they have but haven't yet recognized? Is the problem not theirs, but only mine? Will they automatically take the problem seriously, or must I labor to convince them that it matters? 4. How will readers respond to the solution answer in my main claim? Will it contradict what they already believe? How? Will they know some standard arguments against my solution? Will they want to see the steps that led me to the solution? Do they expect my report to follow a standard format? If so, what is it? 2.